My name is Lou Beaty Jr. I am 76 years old, soon to be 77, God willing. I am from Detroit, Michigan. My parents were Lou and Maggie Beaty. My brother and sister are Sherry and Chris Beaty. Sister is deceased. I had an older sister, Joanne, half-sister, who passed years ago. My family was influential in a lot of things in Detroit. Yet I will start with my youth and find their story on the way. I was born in 1945. And in those early years, TV came to be something. When I was a child, it was huge. And everyone listened to the radio and had a radio. But in 1948, I recall being taken to a store where we bought either a Muntz or an Admiral TV. The screen was about as big as a cantaloupe. And from that point on, TV had me and anyone else in the neighborhood who could find their way to our house because everyone did not have a TV. In the middle 50s, my neighborhood was the most magical musical place ever. Across the street, Jackie Wilson's mother lived for a time, and Jackie Wilson would come out of her apartment house where she lived, get into the car with Cecil Franklin, Aretha's brother, and Little Willie John, and they would take a half an hour to ride from my house to the end of the street in a 1957 Cadillac convertible that Cecil's dad, Reverend Franklin, had bought for him. They wanted everyone to see them, and everyone got a real beautiful look at them. My neighborhood consisted of Smokey Robinson, who I would see on the playground, Aretha Franklin, of course. I played a lot with her younger sister, Carolyn, who was a talent in her own right, and her brother Cecil became one of my best friends in life. A lot of people talk, well, the Four Tops were also there. So many singers, so many that you would have never heard of would sing out on the street or under the street light. This is the middle 50s when doo-wop was king, and you would make music with your voices without instruments. And this was just, it was, Tony Orlando asked me once, was there something in the water in Detroit? Because everybody sings Dawn, the ladies Dawn are from Detroit as well. I could talk about this all day, but I want to keep it moving. At the end of my street was Teddy Harris. He became the band leader for Aretha. I would hear him as a child playing on the piano as I walked by there. On the other end of the street was Dick Smith, who became a record promoter with Clive Davis, Arista Records. It was just magic in the air everywhere. At 14, actually 13, my mother took me to Esther Gordy Edwards' home. I met her son, Robert Bullock, and I followed him to St. Emma Military Academy, Rock Castle, Virginia, September 7th, 1959. I never shall forget. St. Emma was started by one of the Drexel sisters from Philadelphia, who were the most philanthropic people, I believe, to Native Americans and African Americans. And before that, they were that to European Americans, but they focused on Native Americans and African Americans. And Saint Catherine Drexel, one of the Drexel sisters, became a saint, started her own order, the Sisters of the SBS. And they actually she started 60 schools, over 60 schools for African Americans and Native Americans throughout America and beyond. One of the greatest ladies in the history of America, St. Catherine Drexel. You should all look her up. She is the most wonderful person. The older kids would talk about her and I would cry. I never met the lady, but the things she did for Black people and Native American people in Arizona, St. Michael's is one of the places, Arizona, New Mexico, the Pueblo Indians, the Navajo Indians, they will tell you some of the things that Catherine Drexel did. So we went to her school, St. Emma Military Academy in Virginia, and it was mostly Black, but some Native Americans, but mostly African Americans. The sister school was St. Francis de Sales. Now at this school, and I'm speaking the early 60s now. At this school, you had young ladies from all over America, African Americans, who were being taught by the Sisters of the Blessed Sacrament, as the Holy Ghost fathers were teaching us over at St. Emma. Some of these beautiful young ladies did wonderful things after graduating, and some of the young men from St. Emma, Tuskegee Airmen, statesmen, mayors, doctors, lawyers, educators, just a wonderful situation. Those were the 60s for me. Now, we also, my father, among other things, had a record company, La Beat Records, L-A, capital B-E-A-T, a small record company in Detroit. Motown was not the only record company in Detroit. A lot of extremely talented people did not go to Motown. United Sound, Wheelsville, I can't think of all of them right now, but the music scene in Detroit was absolutely remarkable. And we benefited from being around all of this wonderful music as a child. The 70s, after Fisk University, where I was blessed to enter the Fisk Jubilee Singers in my senior year, 1968-69. After Fisk, I became a radio person in Detroit. And it was at that point where I sold airtime ads. I produced the ads for my clients, and Black theater had no focus in Detroit until a show called No Place to Be Somebody came to town. When this show came, they were not doing well. I convinced Ashton Springer, the producer from New York, to let me write his ads and put him on the radio. When this happened, they became the biggest thing in town, and Black theater got a foothold. From that point, at the Vest Pocket Theater, a little 800-seater, this is the very early 70s, shows like Arms Too Short to Box with God, Ain't Supposed to Die Natural Death. I forget the names of all of them, but that began that whole Black theater series in Detroit, which had no scene before that. And that was an accomplishment that I take pride in and still lasts to this day. After working as a radio person, by the end of the 1970s, myself, I did a commercial for a client. And that commercial was a TV commercial. And it ran for 3 years. And between 78 and 81, I transitioned from radio to stage and commercials and industrial films. If I did that for 7 years. And in 1986, I did Mama, I Want to Sing with the New York cast. And 1987, I did, shucks, what was the name of the show? Back in the World. Back in the World was a story about Vietnam vets. It won Best Show in Town, one of the newspapers. And we got a claim again. I ended up in Los Angeles to do film and TV in '87. From that point, I have been on more shows than I can count. I have done more commercials than I can count. And that is where I am to this point. After 40 years in the industry, I am doing still film, television. Currently, I am recurring on an ABC show, A Million Little Things. And I just finished a film in Arizona, which I cannot talk about because production wants the right to tell everyone about this wonderful film we shot when they are ready. So we did some wonderful things in Arizona. We shot at Mescal, a place where over 100 Westerns have been shot, one of which is Tombstone, but there are so many others. This place should be talked about, should be seen. People should visit it. And Arizona should be proud of all the films that were done there and in Arizona, period. And hopefully you guys will get the incentives back and a lot of that activity will continue. Presently, I have moved back to Detroit with my wife, and we are renovating a home for our senior years, and that's basically what we've done. There are so many people that I have met on my way who are huge stars, who are just wonderful people without being stars, because in this business, there are so many wonderful people that you would never know about, and the experience has been grand for me. Maybe there are other questions that I could be asked at this point, because I could talk about a lot of things. In the 4th grade, I went from public school, Alger, in Detroit, to St. George. And I'm sorry about that. Can we, in the 4th grade, I went from public school to Alger School to St. George. St. George was a small Catholic school. It was a Lithuanian parish. During white flight in the 50s, after the war, a lot of beautiful churches and schools were abandoned, I guess you might say, but this is not a demeaning thing. People moved to other areas, and us Black kids were blessed with this wonderful little Catholic school. And in that school, I met some wonderful people, some of which became a lot of things: bank executives, real estate people. Rosalind Ashford of the Vandellas was in our choir. Betty Jo Haskins, who is now Betty LaVette and considered one of the greatest blues singers in America, was also in the class behind me. We all sang in the choir. But my dad was able to pay for our tuition by doing work at the school. He was a general contractor. And because of his work in refurbishing the brick, replastering things, the Archdiocese of Detroit found out about how good he was at this. And ensuingly, my father became the go-to guy for repairs in the Archdiocese of Detroit and all the Catholic churches. From that point, once the African-American preachers found out about my dad's work, and at most all this time he used African-American plasterers. Mr. Block was the electrician. Mr. Washington was the plumber, and just all African-American artisans, if you will. And from that point, the African-American preachers who found themselves in these churches that others had left to move out to the suburbs. My father did their churches as well. We built Reverend Franklin's church, Aretha's dad. It was the Oriole Theater, and we basically gutted it as a theater and put in the baptismal founts, the crosses, everything, a cafeteria. So we built that and a bunch of other things. My dad and his brothers, the Beaty brothers, were known in Detroit for getting things done. They owned between them 10 small hotels. They rebuilt, rehabbed buildings for schools, for churches. They were just doers. None had a college education. My father was given a scholarship to Wayne State as a musician, I am told. But when the Jewish family who sponsored him, and he sometimes stayed at their home, when there was a cross burned on their lawn early on, my dad dropped out of college and still became a pillar in the Detroit society. Others that in the Cotillion Club, he was friends with so many wonderful doctors, lawyers, Indian chiefs, if you will. Sherry Payne, Frida Payne, their father was also in this club. It was just a wonderful experience for us. I'll never forget Father Stocker. Father Stocker's job at the Archdiocese of Detroit was to keep the money coming. Father Stocker was a lively, wonderful individual who would come to our home many times, and we would enjoy his company. So what I'm saying in essence is, we got to, as children in my family, rub shoulders with people from all segments of the society. Our neighborhood, which was by this time predominantly African American, and a lot of neighborhoods in America get this ghetto stigma. But I want to tell you right now, half of the people I grew up with became judges, physicians. The other half, educators, are just people who did wonderful things in the society. The other half did not fare as well, and some ended up being lawless. But these were not the only people that our neighborhoods produced. Back then, Black businesses were the only businesses that, for the most part, we could go to. So there were Black soda shops. The Barthwell family in Detroit had many locations where you could go and get sodas. And when I say sodas, I mean like ice cream sodas and sundaes and things like that. There were many families who supplied many needs. The Brent family on the North End, they had grocery stores. And this was just done all throughout. So people have got to know that the ghetto was not always the ghetto, that it was a wonderful place to live and grow up. But when urban removal, commonly termed urban renewal, came, for the most part, the interstates that went through all of these towns in America, for the most part, went through the commercial A of Black America. And commercial A in our town meant streets that were full of stores, full of things that you needed, hardware stores, grocery stores, cleaners, barber shops. These places were taken out by the interstates from Detroit to Nashville, from most any town you were in. These roads came through Black neighborhoods, so Black businesses were no longer able to succeed, and you should know that. And as the future unfolds, you guys want to pay attention to where expansion goes and what it leaves in its wake. But my dad was a wonderful dad. My mom, my mother went to Northern High School, and she was a stickler for English. When we grew up, she would not let us out without making sure we had command of the King's English. The word is get, not get. The word is, may I have this, not can I have this. My mother was just that person that made sure and stood by us through anything. My mother probably made me a man. I had a paper route when I was 11, and there was this bully who was taking my money. I was a goody two-shoes and didn't have the balls to stand up to the bully. One day he came after my money, and my mother came out of nowhere with a broken off hoe in her hand and started swinging. I said after that day, I will never let my mother defend me again. And it was at that point in my life, at 11 years old, where I stood to fight. I saw something not long after that that was the most impressive thing I'd ever seen. And this was by another gentleman who at that time was a young man, older than me. His name was William Phillips. He is now a reverend in the AME church. But back then, on the playground, I believe Smokey was on the playground that day because everybody was there. A bully picked on William Phillips. We called him Phil because I was studious. He walked around with his books in his hand. And this guy was on the boxing team. So Phil was a student. He beat Phil up. Phil never stopped fighting. Never saw anything like it in my life. The most courageous thing I've ever seen in my life. He was taking the licking of a lifetime. People were saying, stop. It went from this guy being a bully to this guy being persona non grata. Phil, who took this whipping, kept getting up. It was remarkable. When he walked away from this, he was bleeding. Things were out of place. He was disheveled, but he walked away like a man. And he gained my admiration and that of those who were there, and there were many. It showed you that in life, even if you are going to probably lose, you must fight. And you must never stop fighting. And that is probably the biggest lesson I ever learned in my life. And all of you should take that with you. Just because someone is going to put a whooping on you does not mean that you cannot fight. It's a lesson in life, believe me. Reverend William Phillips, thank God for that man. He's still alive. What else can I talk about? Let's take a break. When I went to St. Emma in 1959, I told anyone who would listen about my neighborhood. They were dumbfounded. The fact that the Four Tops, the Miracles, Smokey, Aretha, Diana Ross lived 4 doors from Smokey on Belmont Street when she was young, all right? At some point, she moved up to the projects, but she was originally on Belmont, or at least I know she was on Belmont at one time, 4 doors from Smokey, because he told me. But Aretha lived one block in front of him. At the end of Smokey's block was Donald Byrd, later to be Donald Byrd of the Blackbirds, who started the Blackbirds and who taught at Howard University. One block behind them was Betty LaVette. Think about this. You got a block where you got Aretha Franklin. The very next block is Smokey Robinson. 4 doors over from him is Diana Ross. At the end of the block is Donald Byrd. On the next block, or maybe 2 blocks over, is, I just forgot her name. Anyway, another vocal singer. If you go back this way, you've got people in other groups. Lil Willie John was on, I think it was John R. and Kenilworth. The 4 Tops were, well, 3 of them, Lawrence, Obie, and Duke, were over near my auntie's house, still on the north end. And Levi, who is Jackie Wilson's first cousin. Didn't you know that? You didn't know that, did you? All right. Lived near my grandmother's house in North Detroit. Wasn't quite the north end, close enough. The point is that all of these things were going on. And I was telling people when I went to my new school about this, and they said, you should write a book. And wherever I went, when I went to Michigan State for a moment, I sang on big shows there. And I was there for only a year, but I told people about my neighborhood there. When I got to Fisk, I told people about my neighborhood there. So I eventually wrote a play about my neighborhood using the music of Ivy Jo Hunter. Ivy Jo became a friend after I got back from college in '69. And I would go to Ivy's house, and Ivy would have all this music over the floor. Now, Ivy wrote Dancing in the Street, Martha and the Vandellas, Just Ask the Lonely, 4 Tops, You, Marvin Gaye. I can't think of all the tunes Ivy wrote. Ivy will tell you himself that he has been rich a couple of times. So I guess there were some dips. But anyway, when I would go to Ivy's house, it would just be me and him a lot of times. And we would just, just be singing. Now we sang the same note, so that was tough. But Ivy had all this music strewn all over the floor. And when he would play it, I would say, I remember one time I said, Ivy, this is not R&B. This is show music. He said, I know, I wrote it. So when I wrote my play about the North End, all these wonderful singers and musicians who were there, I used the music of Ivy Jo. Ivy Jo's tune, Hold On to Your Dream, was the name I used for the show, because it was about my neighborhood and so many neighborhoods in America. And this is not a color thing, just happened to be Black, my neighborhood, but so many neighborhoods in the Rust Belt that had been left behind when industry moved overseas. It talked about the grit of these people staying and sticking around, the good times they were had, the hard times they were going through, and the fact that they knew the neighborhood would come back. And at some point it has in a lot of areas, not everyone, but this is what the play was about. And I remember everyone saying to me, you should write a book, as I was a young person, but I wrote a play. So if Hold On to Your Dream, if we do get it back up, because people loved Hold On to Your Dream. I was trying to get out before the Motown story because I didn't want that story to overshadow the Detroit story. Motown is one of the greatest things. Berry Gordy made a path for every singer in America that was African American, if you ask me. Berry Gordy was the Pied Piper in a good way. But there were other people from Detroit, Jackie Wilson, Aretha Franklin, the Dramatics, who is probably Detroiters' favorite group. We love the Temps. We love the Temps. But there are so many talented people that this story talks about, or the fact that you have these neighborhoods all across the country that want to come back. They're struggling now, but home prices are going up. This is a feel-good story. Hold on to your dream. I remember once in the middle 60s, I was singing with my friends Jerome Crawford and Frankie Sims, and we would back up anybody. And if we didn't have a lead singer that we ran into, Jerome would sing lead, and Frankie and I would back up Jerome. Well, we were doing sessions at my dad's record company, Beaty, and Jimmy Ruffin came by one day. And Jimmy Ruffin listened to us and he said, if Motown doesn't do anything with me, you're gonna be my group and we're gonna go on the road. Well, within 6 months, he had what becomes of a brokenhearted. So we did not become Jimmy's group, but Jimmy got up and he wrote that song for a lifetime. God bless Jimmy Ruffin, the brother of David Ruffin. And so many wonderful artists that came up that didn't get, and sometimes, because in a record company, you might have 20 acts and they only promote 1 or 2 at a time. All these other people are extremely talented, but they don't actually get as far as some of the others, but they're still just as talented. On my block, on the North End, the Johnson brothers, who are featured in Hold On to Your Dream. These guys, any three of them, but Alfonso, Alonzo, and Major, would sing in the alcove of the school a block away. And you would hear them for easily 3 to 4 blocks around in the evenings in the summertime. And you would sit on your porch and you would listen to the most melodic stuff you ever heard with just 3 of them. Some nights, Jackie Wilson would sing on the corner with Frog and them. Frog and some of the guys that sang with Frog became the Satin Tones. But this is before these people became, of course, Jackie at that point he was singing and everybody knew who Jackie was, singing with Billy Ward and the Dominoes. And then there were also the talent shows. I spoke, before I did my play, I got a lot of background from people who were older than me because I was younger than all these people. Don't get me wrong. I was not friends with most any of these people. I could name those who were my close friends. Obie Benson of the Four Tops, Bobby Rogers of the Miracles. I can name a few more, but for the most part, I'm 5, 6 years younger than all these people. So I went to people to just make sure I was getting my points right. And Mac Rice, some call him Sir Mac Rice. Mac Rice, when I called him on the phone, he said, someone told me you're writing a story about the North End. I said, yeah. If you're from the North End, then who rode around on his bicycle with a big top hat? And before he finished, I said, shucks, I just everybody knew this guy. What's wrong with me? Anyway, I said the guy's name. He said, oh, you're from the North End. As a child, I used to listen to, a matter of fact, I had a friend now who is in Arizona, Charles Long. We called him Sonny. Sonny and I grew up together. We would listen to the Falcons rehearse And in the Falcons were Mac Rice, JoJo Stubbs, the brother of Levi and first cousin of Jackie Wilson. I wish I had written these names down, but Wilson Pickett, Eddie Floyd, all of these guys, we hear them practicing as we were kids in Northern Recreation. So these are just wonderful memories of what I say when summer nights were long and hot, when lightning bugs filled the air. If you could have sat in these times in the 50s and sometimes in the 60s, when the lightning bugs were still around and nighttime came and these guys started singing on the corner or singing on this corner or singing in the alcove of the school, and you just sat there and listened, it was the most wonderful experience you could have had without a television. They were making music with their voices. Back then, I wanted to be a singer as well, and I did become somewhat of a vocalist. But if you walked up on a group of guys singing, they would say, you have to find a note if you want to join with us, because first tenor is fill, second tenor is fill, baritone is fill, bass is fill. So you better find another note if you want to sing with us. So this helped doo-wop because you weren't just a big deal because you could sing lead. You were a big deal if you could harmonize. So you had to find harmony. And there's so many wonderful remembrances of just walking up on a bunch of guys and seeing the glee in their eyes when you found that other note and added a fifth or a sixth part. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it. I want to tell you about my mother. I told you earlier about how she was a stickler for your English. You could not go out if you did not do your homework, and she would check your homework. When you ask my mother a question like, Mama, what does this mean? She would say, I'll give you my definition, but over time, words morph into different meanings. So look it up. She gave us a dictionary and she bought a used set of encyclopedia. When I went to bed, those books were looking me in the face. When I woke up, those books were looking me in the face. I feel that I read the encyclopedia 3 times before I was 16. Now, here's my mother's logic, and this may be the most important thing I say today. When you look into a book to find a word, you run into 3 or 4 words on your way to that word. When you go on a computer for a word, you don't have that. So your vocabulary is advanced so much more when you go to a book and try to find the meaning of one word, and on your way to that word, you find 3 or 4 words that are close to it in spelling, close to it in sound. And this is the best thing you could do for a child, is to have books, not a computer, because the computer does not give you that broader picture that broadens your vocabulary and broadens your life, broadens your ability to be able to be understood, because people will qualify you first by appearance, second by your vocabulary, your speech. And if you get past those two, then they might find out the quality of the person you are. But the general public will X you out based on what you're wearing and then what comes out of your mouth. If you can pass those two, you can make some inroads in life. Keep that in mind for your children or for yourself. I didn't find out until after I left St. Emma who St. Catherine Drexel was. And for a long time, she had not been a saint until around the year 2000 or so. But Catherine Drexel and her family of Philadelphia was probably the richest debutante in America. And she chose to become a nun after going to the Pope in Rome, telling him that he should send an order of nuns and priests to teach the Native Americans and African Americans. The Pope told Catherine Drexel, why don't you do it? Ensuingly, Catherine finally became a nun, started her own order, and as I had said before, she initiated over 60 schools for Native Americans and African Americans. Now, why did she do this? Well, her family, her father, Francis Drexel, was doing all of these wonderful things as a rich man in America for the downtrodden. And this is before the Native Americans and African Americans. Francis Drexel was in banking. He had been an artist when he came from Europe, running from the Napoleonic Wars. He found a way in time to balance, each state had its own money. So if you had Tennessee money, for example, and you wanted to shop in New York, he found a way to balance these things so that the money would come out right. His brothers joined in with him and they formed a banking concern that would help all of these transactions. After Andrew Jackson became president, I am told, I understand that a national currency was needed, and they had everything to do with coming up with a national currency balanced throughout all the states. They became rich. But this man, Francis, who had a heart for people, opened his coffers to the public when necessary. His wife, Emma, who was the stepmother to one of his children and the mother to two, they would have a back door at their house or a side door where the poor would come in Philadelphia, knock on the door and say that they needed this or that. They needed shoes for the children. They needed money for coal for the winter, they needed whatever. And Emma would dish out money to the public if they could prove their need. And she would have people that she would send out to make sure these people needed. So when the general public who were poor found these things out, there was a line going to the Drexel house. The children grew up seeing this. And the father taught them that all this money we make is no good unless it does good. So these three sisters learned from their family, from their father, what they should be doing with their money. When their father passed away, they made a pledge to help Native Americans and African Americans because that's where they wanted to go. But before that, the Drexel family was helping European families in America. They had they were assisting with lodging for children who did not have parents. After these orphanages they helped the orphans. When the children came out of the orphanages, one of the daughters built a magnificent trade school in Pennsylvania. I believe it was Francis de Sales. Huge facility, power plant, everything, teaching the children of European descent who came out of these orphanages a trade so that they could become substantial members of society and produce for society. And their pledge was to always give the very best education to these children that they could. So now that Francis has passed away, the mother had passed away already, they go to the Pope. At least I know that Catherine did. And told the Pope in Europe, said, well, we would like you to send an order of nuns or some priests to help the Native Americans, because she saw their plight as she rode on the trains in the rich, Pullman cars, the rich cars, private cars that her parents had. You would see the plight of the Native Americans as they traveled, and they saw the plight of slaves and former slaves as they traveled. So she was dedicating her life to this when the Pope said, I can't send anyone. Why don't you do it? After a few years, she became a nun, started her own order, the Sisters of the SBS. And they opened over 60 schools. I believe I've said this before, for Native Americans and African Americans. But everybody that needed funding went to Catherine Drexel to get it. The priest who was handling the lepers in Molokai, was it? Father Damien got money from Catherine Drexel. The family in the movie, The Sound of Music, when they fled Germany, they stayed at the mother house of Catherine Drexel in Pennsylvania. This lady is, to me, the most wonderful lady. I interviewed some Native Americans. I'm doing a documentary on Catherine. It's slowed down right now because my funding is dried up, but I interviewed a Native American in New Mexico and also in Arizona. But in New Mexico, this one man, he said, don't turn on the cameras. I got something I want to say first. And when you're on a Native American property, you got to do what the hell these people say because they're running things, all right? This man started saying, who is this lady? Who sent her? Where did she come from? All the way from Philadelphia to help us. This man was almost in tears in the gratitude that he had and the appreciation he had, because there was a church that Catherine had built right there, I don't know, less than 100 yards from where we were. And he was so appreciative. And I'm looking at the camera guy and he's looking at me. This is the magic that we wanted to get, but he's not allowing us to, because he wanted to say this before the interview. I'm looking at the cameraman. What can we do? So this is great, but we didn't get it. But that's how she affected people. There was, her flagship is Xavier University in New Orleans, which she had to purchase with a straw buyer, because had they known that this property was going to be for the education of African Americans, it would have never been sold to her. There are many stories throughout her history of her challenging the morals of the time, as to how people treated Native Americans and African Americans. But this school and all the ancillary schools, she produced the teachers at Xavier who went out into Louisiana and other parts of the South to teach rural African Americans. She built schools and churches in Native American lands throughout the West. Red Cloud, I believe it was in 1892, after some incident like Wounded Knee or something, when the young Braves wanted to kill every white person around, Red Cloud told the young Braves, run everybody out, but don't mess with the lady at the school. If you mess with her, you got to mess with me. This is the love, and she did not get it right away. When I spoke with the Navajo folk that I did speak to, and the Pueblo people that I did speak to, she had to convince them that she was sincere. And over a period of time, she and her nuns convinced these folks that they were here to help. One of the greatest ladies in America, St. Catherine Drexel. She could have been rich debutante. She wore shoes until they had holes in them. She used pencils down to their nubs. She did everything she could to uplift African Americans and Native Americans. She should be lauded by America because her family did it for all races. She did it for these races. This woman should be appreciated. And I hope to at some point, because I have got 5 years of information on this family, I'm practically ready to shoot with a script. I just need help. If there is help, I welcome it. Because this lady's story should be told, not just for us, but for America, because reaching across the color line in this day and age to do good is needed to be shown.